Hey, great. Hello and welcome to, I think this is KCRep 6 Thursday Night Mixer. I'm Stuart Carden, the Artistic Director of KCRep. Uh, actually coming to you live from Kentucky, where I'm visiting my family for the moment. And I would love to introduce you to this week's guests, including lighting and projection designer, Rachael Cady.
Hello.
Artistic director of the Coterie Theatre Jeff Church. He probably waved and I missed him for a second. and theater artist Darrington Clark.
Hi.
Thank you all so much for joining us for this series. I've been really excited about this conversation and mixing it up with you all. This is going to be unique this week because I'm in Kentucky, and so our really terrific sponsors, Lifted Spirits, have delivered cocktail kits to Rachael and Darrington and Jeff, who are going to mix while I enjoy a spindrift sparkling water. So they're going to mix. After we mix this cocktail, which looks really amazing, then we're going to engage in some conversation on a variety of topics. And then after that, we're going to open things up to you all for questions and comments. And then we're going to wrap with a final question for the group. So we're going to start, however, if you all are ready, Darrington,
yes.
Rachael, and Jeff. We're going to start with our official Thursday night mixed cocktail from Lifted Spirits Distillery, the Wild East, which is one of their top sellers. And in it, and I'm going to turn this over to you all since you all are mixing, but in it is vodka, lime, simple syrup, and jalapeno shrub.
Yes.
So I'm going to turn it over to you all to mix, and then I might throw in a definition of what a shrub is, because I had no idea, and Jen Spa gave us some intel from bartender.com what a shrub is. So Jeff, Darrington, Rachael, do you all want to take away the mixing?
Sure. We have these handy dandy instructions right here on our batch bottle. But unfortunately, they include measurements, and I do not have a way to measure these things, so we're gonna eyeball. It's gonna be a great night.
It's about half and half. Half vodka and then half your jalapeno shrub, lime juice with the sugar. I would just, it's more fun when you just.
It's more fun when you just,
be an alchemist about it.
Vodka smells really good.
Yeah.
Oh, I haven't opened it yet.
And it's their brand vodka too.
I know, and Lifted Spirits has been amazing partnering with us, and we were a part of their bartender series where they had guest bartenders, and now Jen just informed me we're now they're providing cocktail kits from their own bartender series, and this is a drink that you can get when you visit their distillery. So you all are mixing. I asked you this before we got on, but I had never heard of a shrub.
No.
A shrub.
Do you have any guesses on what a shrub?
Jalapeno shrub. None that wouldn't reveal.
It sounds like a little sprig of something.
I was going to say, is it powdery that you add to the liquid?
Definitely, this smells vaguely of jalapeno.
Well, yes, when I had the drink here, it had plenty of jalapeno kick.
Well, according to Jen Spa, and we're going to hold her to this since she did the research. According to Jen Spa, a shrub is a drink. So it's a drink made with an acidic ingredient like vinegar. Oh. Historically, it was a way of taking perishable fruit and preserving its shelf life.
Oh my God.
Similar to a jam or a preserve in that regard, except it's drinkable. And you can also use a shrub as a cocktail ingredient. It adds This is straight from bartender.com. I love this. It adds structure and backbone to a drink in a way that citrus doesn't.
How on earth do they want you to slice this thing?
I sliced mine and put it on a, like a skewer.
Did you just take like a corner out of it, or what'd you do?
Well, you want it's very hot, so you want to take the middle out and just leave the green.
Oh, see, it doesn't say that.
Yeah, I'm gonna leave that part.
I tried it with the seeds in it, and you really kind of want to take those out.
Rachel, how daring are you to do this on air, or are you gonna?
Absolutely.
Cut this thing.
Are you? All right.
Cutting it now. I came prepared. I've got
That's right, you have
a
a
knife,
knife.
got a cutting board, got a shot glass. Okay. Cut the seeds out.
And do you stir this drink? Do you shake it? Do you pour it over ice? What
Yeah,
do you do?
I shook mine in a shaker. And Darrington, you have your own homemade shaker.
My own homemade shaker of 2 plastic cups because we're all adults here.
All right.
But then yes, you pour it over ice and you can give
with.
it garnish.
Yeah, stir away.
Okay. I'm not as fancy. I don't have a shaker.
I think stirring,
Tell us when you're ready, and we will.
Okay, sorry.
Oh no, this is great.
I'm really good at following directions, but I'm obsessive about getting them right.
Well, 1.75 ounces, it said.
Good.
So,
This is graduated exactly perfect.
Oh, you totally did do the
This
one.
is gonna taste so
Oh
great.
my God.
I figure if they put actual numbers on the thing, it must mean something. So there you go.
Yes, that proportion we are.
Okay.
I appreciate all of you. Thank you for joining us for this conversation. Cheers from Kentucky. Good to see you.
Cheers.
Cheers, cheers.
Ooh.
Mm.
That's
How spicy is it?
good.
It's just got a really nice aftertaste of the pepper.
Yeah, but it's mostly lime that I get right, and it's so refreshing.
Yeah, it's really, you taste the lime and citrus, but then at the end there's kind of this jalapeno.
Mhm.
That's exactly what it. And Darrington, did you put a little piece of your pepper in there?
I did not because as the person who is using 2 plastic cups as a shaker, it was just a guaranteed disaster in form of pepper in this.
Too much.
I get you.
The jalapeno too far.
I'm glad. I really would love it. I couldn't do the jalapeno though. I will immediately get hiccups to a ridiculous degree. Jalapenos immediately give me hiccups, but
That's so
I think just the essence I'm into. So I'm gonna have to go try this.
I can see why this stuff is really popular in the summer.
Yes.
It's very
Love a drink.
effervescent, refreshing. It's good.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I've got a whole bunch more left.
Yeah.
Yeah, these kits typically serve 12 to 16 people.
I know.
So, or one if you're really in need.
Right.
You're
Yeah.
really
How long are we
aggressive
doing
there.
this? Till midnight?
Well, thank you all for joining the KCRep Thursday night mixer. We started this series really pretty quickly after the shelter-in-place moment, and to have creative conversations with theater artists in this moment where making theater has been disrupted. And so we started that process, and the focus was really about that in the early ones. But we, in so many ways, are living in an historic moment, and really monumental turning points in our contemporary history are revealing themselves throughout this shelter-in-place time period. And so this conversation has naturally been evolving, and it will continue to evolve because theater and theater artists are really, I think, our work is to be timely and responsive and speak to the moment in the best ways that theater can. And so the conversation today is going to continue to evolve and fold in these historic events and moments that we're in. We talked about what the topics we might engage today. And the one that I would love for us to start with is to talk about this really extraordinary Supreme Court ruling. This is Pride Month, and there was a very extraordinary Supreme Court ruling that I know many of you out there have been following, and where there has been a new ruling on Title VII of the Civil Rights Act that expands the notion of the word sex that was used in that original Civil Rights Act, Title VII. And it really caught a lot of people by surprise, both the court ruling and also the lead author of that court ruling. And so I wonder if I may just open up the conversation and ask you all what you're thinking about this ruling and how it impacts you either individually or as a theater artist in this moment.
Should we all go at once?
Yeah.
Whoever wants to go first.
I'll start. So I was astounded by this ruling. I would have bet anything that it was going to go against us.
Yes.
And in fact, there was several of my friends, we would log on Monday mornings to see if the ruling had come down for the last 3 weeks or so. That's what we would do over breakfast or coffee or something. And it's like, okay, is it there yet? Is it there yet? And then it came through and I couldn't believe it. I had to read it twice to actually sort of bring it in. So what I love about it is, for one thing, it provides protection for LGBTQ people that don't explicitly have that already in their states, like Missouri, for instance, and Kansas. I think the best part of it, though, is even though it was sort of limited in scope, it interpreted the law, by the text. It didn't attempt to redefine what sex is and what a man is and what a woman is. It just clearly said that you cannot discriminate based on your sex. And it's hard to argue that. So yeah, it was wonderful. And, it's a great first step. The battle is not over, but
we've had this last few weeks where I feel like I'm continually being punched in the stomach. And here, when I was expecting another punch, I actually got a hug. And it was the craziest feeling, and especially personally living in the intersectionality of race and sexuality. I've always had this "we're not free until we're all free" mentality. We can't leave anybody behind. And the idea that, again, like you said, the law isn't being interpreted in some new, progressive agenda sort of way, but we're just reading what it says and following what it says. Is really amazing, and it feels really unifying in this time where almost every other conversation is so divisive.
I was gonna, what struck me was that old language using the term sexes or sex actually ended up helping us in a way. Inside the Coterie's mission is that some of that old language, which says breaking down barriers between races, sexes, and generations. That's in our mission. And, that word has always kind of been sort of, makes me wince because it felt old fashioned. And today we say genders or something like that. But actually that word ended up, as Rachel was, mentioning, they didn't try to redefine it. That word ended up being so broad that, it held water in a way. Enough water at least. So, I was thrilled, but it made me think about, language is important in a way, and it was whoever crafted that back then, good for them. It held.
Well, I just read this. Oh, Rachel, go ahead. Sorry.
It's okay. I'm just going to say, and because of them not sort of redefining this, hopefully this ruling can be used as precedent moving forward to things like Title IX in schools and sports and LGBTQ youth and stuff.
Yes.
Is my hope anyway.
And Jeff, to speak to that the question of the introduction of the word sex, I read this editorial today that just blew me away. I don't know if anyone else read this, but the introduction of the word sex into the Civil Rights Act was put in place by a very conservative, segregationist leaning conservative, because he thought that it would be a bridge too far for his fellow congressmen at the time period, predominantly men, a bridge too far, and then therefore it would be rejected. And so that was added late. And
what year was it added?
When the Civil Rights Act was first passed. Yeah. And so that word was added into the legislation. I may be misquoting this. I just read it today, but it blew me away to think that a conservative representative was working to sabotage the Civil Rights Act, and has ended up, that word has now been used in this moment.
Perfect.
Who was perceived a conservative judge to then be utilized in a way that is inclusive. And that,
perfect story.
Yeah.
How, from your perspective, how does this ruling impact people's daily lives?
Well, I know as a trans person, it's huge to have that kind of, protection at your job, because so many of us, once we come out and once we start to live as ourselves, it's like a push all the chips into the center of the table kind of game. We risk losing everything. And so at least in this thing, we have some sort of protection. Trans folks lose their job all the time as soon as they come out. So it feels like a huge win, and hopefully it can be, something that gains momentum moving forward.
As far as I have been able to see with trans people specifically, it seems as though they have been fighting legislations and rulings for as long as I have been alive. As long as I have known what it means to be trans, I have also known that there are laws that have had to be struck down and reconfigured and reformed, since I knew what they were, just for inclusion, just for trans people to have what literally everyone else has. And so while I'm still looking at the fact that it is 2020 and we just sort of got here, but it is a step in the right direction, and I'm hoping it is sort of like the rest of the movement that we find ourselves in right now. Hopefully the first of many steps to getting everyone where we all need to be.
You had used the word protections, Rachel, and that goes all the way through to our concern about can we have even an interaction with the police if you're a person of color, and feel at all that you will be safe, or protections are important. And this has been the year to think about that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. If we could just get the message across that, trans men are men and trans women are women and non-binary people are valid and exist.
Right.
Would have a lot of this nonsense happening and discrimination, but it was fantastic. But I agree with you, Darrington. I can't believe it's 2020 and we have to make a law that says it's bad to fire someone for who they are.
And what else I want to speak to, it's sort of, even if you were a trans person who was sort of somehow magically, living in this time and not dramatically affected at every turn by your gender identity, there is still, and I can speak to this from my experience, even if nothing is directly affecting you, living in the world knowing that there is this weight, that you don't have protections, that every time you sort of step out of your door, you're sort of raw and exposed, especially in terms of the law, can really be a mental weight. It can really be something that gets to you late at night, even if you got through the whole day without experiencing a microaggression or someone outright being transphobic to you. You still always sort of move through the world knowing that if something were to happen to you, nobody would really do anything. And so even easing that mental weight, knowing that there are people out there who are willing to advocate for you, can make a huge difference in your daily life and your daily stress levels and how you approach things and people. Knowing that the protections are there makes a difference to everyone.
I agree. That's well said.
Well said.
Jeff, is there and now I'm second guessing asking this.
No, you were talking about what we talked about today a little bit? No.
No, I was going. I was suddenly going to say, can you give me can you share a historical perspective on this? And that suddenly
I'm an elder.
Like, in terms of age, horrible.
I can actually.
But you can because you came here. You shared a little bit with this with me earlier. That yes. When you came here in the 90s.
Let me get my cane and then I'll come back.
Thank you. I deserve that. That was the most inelegant transition to a question ever.
I'm happy.
But is there a historical perspective on this that you might be able to bridge in terms of you coming here in the 90s and your experience both at the Coterie in this community to this really landmark ruling?
Well, this was a really go-y town. And there was Cafe Lulu and Lou Jane Temple and Ron McGee and all these people doing kind of this great performance art. And, I came here to interview and all of my friends in Washington, D.C. said, what are you doing? You're going to be kicking a cow out of your parking space, and so they took me to Cafe Lulu and there was this great thing going on. And then I did my board interview. And it was at John Kerry and Dudley Hoag's house. And this is in July of 1990. And I thought, it's great that, they have a gay board president. That impressed me. And then their teenage son walked in and they said, oh, this is our son. And then they went on to eventually explain to me that the social services had allowed them to adopt him. And I thought, okay, we have it all wrong in Washington, D.C. about what Kansas City's potential is. And, there was a lot going on, lots of ACT UP work and things like that in the early 90s. And then we did our dramatic AIDS education project that we launched really early to give schools and students HIV and STD education. So there you go. It turned out good.
You didn't need the cane. I'm sorry. That was so.
I work all over the country as a designer, or I used to when I could do that. And I've had actually people say they're sorry when I tell them where I'm from. Based in Kansas City, and like, oh God, I'm so sorry.
Yep.
Right. Yeah, we deal with that today. Like, there are still people who are like, but aren't you on a farm or something?
Right. Right.
Well, I feel like we could engage this topic for the rest of the evening and for several more hours. But if you all are okay with this, why don't we pivot a little bit and talk about what is a really extraordinary moment throughout, from my perspective, throughout our society happening right now, a really profound movement in response to the killing of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, who my wife and I just went down to downtown Louisville and captured a bunch of photos of the street art remembrances and murals to Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, and on and on and on, and the police brutality, but also the social justice and anti-racist movement that's happening both through the protests that are continuing throughout the country in Kansas City, and how that is really sending reverberations throughout our society and also in the theater. And so I would love to talk a little bit about where you all are in terms of, as theater artists, in terms of that intersection of activism and human rights work around Black Lives Matter and anti-racism and social justice in this moment. And I'm interested also in, and I will jump in on this as well, of what you think our responsibility is as artists and as theater artists is at this moment, engaging in this societal revolution. And some people may think that's hyperbolic and a really like strong use of that language. But I genuinely feel like we're not only in the middle of a movement, but we're in the middle of a revolution right now that has a lot of traction and energy, and people are open to conversations that they weren't open to before, and people are examining on every part of our society where racism is being actively perpetrated and how we can work to be anti-racist and work against the systems that are have historically oppressed people of color, but specifically Black Americans. So that's kind of a big, broad setup for this. But I wonder, in particular, where's, from your perspective, where's the theater artist's place in this moment?
I think I want to start by saying that right now, whether or not it's hyperbole to say that we are in a revolution or something of that matter aside, what I can say that is fact is I have never seen the movement have this much energy.
Yeah.
I've never seen so many people at one time in one place willing to open up and re-examine these old systems that we have been pushing against. And so I think in an opportunity, in a moment like this, it is important to remember that we as people can walk and chew bubblegum at the same time. What has frustrated me the most about what has been happening in this sort of section of the movement is that there's been a lot of criticism about being too broad, that the reverberations that we're seeing in this movement are sort of focusing us to split our attention too much, and that we have to be focused on one thing, on Black Lives Matter, you know, in terms of police brutality. And then maybe we can talk about the Black trans lives. And then maybe we can talk about the racism being perpetrated in Hollywood and on Broadway and in the theater community, to which I disagree. I think if the movement is going to have as much energy as it does right now, this is the best time to start talking about all of those things, putting them all on the table for discussion and open and honest communication and dialogue, and challenge ourselves to see if we can overhaul this, because it's such a massive thing that we're working against that I think we need all voices on the table, and it silences us to say, well, just focus on this part. Let's not talk about the other subsects right now, you know?
That's true. I think.
Go ahead, Rachel.
Well, a couple of things. One of the most amazing things I've witnessed is that these protests that ostensibly against police brutality and racial profiling and whatnot, we've seen sort of a laser focus on how the police have responded to the protests, and they've actually played out exactly what protesting against. It's been kind of amazing. The other thing was, I love the fact that this movement is broad and the volume is turned up so everyone can hear it. I mean, there's so many folks that, you know, they didn't have a thought in their head about Black trans women, but, you know, the average age of a Black trans woman or survival rate here is she's 35 years old in this country.
An epidemic. Epidemic. It is appalling.
So the fact that the volume can be raised and people are seeing it, and it's starting to have an impact, is really heartening to me.
You know, I think about the, you know, this is the time that people have got to see the light or be on the wrong side of history. And that a person that had, I like to read people who forecast, futurists. And there was a futurist who predicted that this year would be a sea tide turning year. And he also predicted that he also could foresee civil war, a version of it. If I feel like, you know, people have to, they have to elevate equality or get out of the way. And so in that elevating equality kind of thing, you know, yes, you know, sometimes I have to speak for the Coterie, and I know we certainly have our white bias and our blind spots, and we do need to get in there and roll up our sleeves and get to work on kind of a ongoing plan. We all, the theaters in Kansas City, do. But I have to say that I'm relieved that there is attention on this police brutality issue, that I worry about our Project Pride kids every time they go home. I worry about my young playwrights. What happens when they leave Crown Center at 8 o'clock, and if they don't exactly go straight home, you know, oh my God, you know, I've worried about that for years and years and years. And not that the worry's over, but I just know that this brutality is out there, and it's unequal, and we just have to get work done.
Yeah, I think as theater artists and theaters too, we need to amplify these stories.
That's right.
On some level, just telling these stories and making these stories more part of, you know, the zeitgeist is really important. And that's definitely something we do really well in theater, is tell stories. So,
but there's a variety of ways to do that. And for lack of a better term, I suppose, my mission statement as an artist has always been to tell the stories that make sense to me and make sense to my heritage as an African-American theater maker, but to also find myself as a piece of the puzzle in stories that traditionally had nobody who looked like me, to begin to normalize that aspect of it as well. Because there's another element of education that goes into starting to see people of color within the system that was previously only really looked at as white, or as, you know, with non-Black people involved. My boyfriend was born and raised in Nevada, Missouri. And before me, he had no idea the scope of racism in America. There are places in America where people can be born, raised, and die without knowing just how heavy this issue is. And it wasn't until he saw his first play ever in his life, Charlie Brown Christmas, at the Coterie Theatre, that he could see, you know, a person of color on stage, people of color on stage with white people. And there's so much power, I feel, even in that first step, as far as if we're talking about what our responsibility is as theater artists. If telling stories is what we do best, then it's not only the stories that we tell, but the vision, the way in which we see those stories being told, normalizing that we need to start caring about everybody regardless of who they look like. And that can really be the first step to saying, oh, there really is a deeper problem here. Let me start doing research. Let me start getting educated. Let me become an ally. I think that's how that journey can begin to go. And theater artists can have a big part in that.
Yes, re-illustrating, you know, what Theater for Young Audiences can do much better. There's a New York Times article that our field just had a big study that just came out. You know, a lot of our field gets trapped into doing fairy tales and that kind of thing. At the very least, we have to completely re-illustrate. But, you know, where are the folk tales that are not just European in background and heritage? You know, there's so much to be done.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think there's this is just a little bit of a partially sideways move, which is my wife Nisa is a contemporary art, public art, murals, monuments,
Yes.
the intersection with social justice. And so I was never really keyed in to that world until partnering with her. And what is happening right now with the both the monuments that are being being taken down, and simultaneously the new monuments that are going up right now, which is the part of the work that my wife is engaged with, that is really focused on reclaiming the historical impact and importance of Black, Indigenous, and people of color in the foundation of this country, and the success of this country, and the brilliance of this country, when I'm being positive. There seems to me a real opportunity in theater in a similar way to give voice to that history. And TYA is a great place to do it, and so is professional theater for adults. Yours is professional theater for young audiences, and I think there's a real opportunity in this moment to reprioritize whose stories are being told historically as well as contemporaneously. I think there's a great opportunity with the way that conversations have opened up to be able to engage in that in ways that audiences are hungry for, and artists are hungry for, and that the financial resources that are needed to support that type of commissioned work and development are there now. And that's one of the positives that I see in this moment, is that the movement is happening about police brutality, and on that level, at that crucial level, and it's also informing and activating on the theater level conversations and momentum, and being able to move things forward that were maybe stalled or only partially, and inviting you to push harder and faster for progress. And that's really an exciting byproduct of I think the national movement that's happening, that is reverberating around theater. You know, I want to bring up, oh my goodness, we're already starting to run out of time. But I want to bring up something that was really powerful that came out, and get your all's perspective on it. I assume most of you have read this, but there was what do you even call it? We See You White American Theater, which is a movement and a collective of Black, Indigenous, and people of color theater artists, some of the brightest, most compelling, artistically savvy, established and early career artists came together and wrote this manifesto, almost, of We See You White American Theater, that engages, and you all are nodding, so I assume you've all seen it or read it. And it was really powerful for a white artistic leader of a large theater that is a predominantly white institution. It was both a really exciting document to read, and also a terrifying document to read, because I have been hired to lead an organization that has made a lot of progress in many areas in terms of equity. And there are other areas that the theater, and like most regional theaters in America, are woefully in the middle of the pack in other areas. And so this manifesto that came out for me was both, gave me fire and energy and fuel to engage in conversations that I think are really crucial to the future of American theater, and reflecting truthfully and genuinely the communities in which we live and the communities we serve. And it was also terrifying at the same time, because I am taking a leadership role in an organization that is on the path towards equity, but there are areas that it has a long way to go. And so that was one of my kind of dissonant experiences of reading that document, was both fire and excitement and also terror simultaneously, with my own individual artistic path in terms of advocating for equity and amplifying diverse voices, and my intersection with the organization. So I wonder if others had, what your response was, what your feeling was when you read that manifesto. And anyone who hasn't read it, I recommend you go read it. It's really powerful, right. And a really dynamic piece of writing. So does anybody else want to speak to when they read it?
I would like to say something. Yeah, and so that's We Can See You White American Theater. You can just Google search that and it'll come right up.
Did I misquote it? Is that what I said?
Close. We Can See You White American Theater.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I shared it with board members. So I may get in trouble for saying this, but we have this theater alliance that has been formed in Kansas City, and we recently just had where the theater leaders had kind of their own session. It wasn't sort of Kansas City industry wide, it was for the leadership. And Linda Williams, who she and Harvey and Nicole Parson Hedgley, I think I said her name wrong, but the new artistic director there, the three of them and Dameron were doing some remarks to the group, and Linda had prepared a document that was like the manifesto for the White American Theater, but it was local. And it was a manifesto of points that she wanted to make to the very white leadership community in theater. And I thought it was galvanizing. She did such great work, and it was so thoughtful, and I can't stop thinking about it. And I kind of want everybody to have access to that incredible work she did. But anyway, that's my shout out to Linda Williams and a thank you for. I mean, I continue to think about the points that she made, because all things are politics kind of lead to local, and we're busy trying to make things happen in this community, and she was very influential to me.
Mm-hmm. I can tell you that manifesto reverberated into the marrow of my bones. Everyone, any person of color who is involved in theater that you talk to, I challenge you to find one who does not have a story, that does not have some experience that stems from, the systemic racism that we find everywhere, but specifically in this career. And it was such a pointed way to address it. There were words, there were phrases in there that I had felt, but had never been able to coalesce in my mind. And for me, it was equally terrifying to read, but also such a liberation to see put in writing the things that I know that all of us have felt. And that's why I think I've seen it shared so many times, because there was such almost a community, a brotherhood formed in, the statement being declared, and it being declared for everyone, and we could all get behind it. I really encourage you to go read it as well if you haven't. You will find something in there that's relevant to you if you are a person of color. You just will.
And last week's guest, Yetunde Felix Uku, she said, one of last week's guests, and Khalif Gillette, but Yetunde said, and this has really stuck with me, that their web series, Acting Black, the reason they started it was really to have public conversations that were happening privately in the Black community, and that they were engaged by the idea of us partnering last week in the same way. And it sounds like, Darrington, that this was giving voice and naming things publicly, that the conversations that you've been having privately, right? And there's some power to that public naming of the private conversation. I thought that was just really insightful from Yetunde last week. Rachel, did you have no need if you don't have anything to share on this, but did you read it and or have a perspective on it?
Absolutely. I found it incredibly eye-opening. Along with the whole movement has sort of amplified the casual racism that exists in our society everywhere. Just like, you know, Aunt Jemima pancakes, and Uncle Ben's rice, and casually flying the Southern battle flag at NASCAR. It's stuff that, you know, I honestly had taken for granted. I've seen these things all over, but reading this manifesto really pointed it out, and it gave a word to a lot of the things that I had kind of been turning a blind eye to, honestly. So to me, it was like a wake up